It all started as a routine day, but things took a sharp turn when I was stopped by an officer demanding my ID. Now here's the thing, knowing your rights isn't just important, it's empowering. The officer seemed confident, but so was I. This wasn't my first encounter, and I knew the law was on my side. As tensions built, their questions got more pointed, and my calm responses only seemed to frustrate them more. Why was I being stopped? Did I do something wrong? Or was this just another case of pushing boundaries to see how far I'd go? The air was thick with suspense as I held my ground, politely but firmly refusing to hand over my ID. This wasn't about being difficult. It was about standing up for what's right. But then the officer made a move that left me stunned, and you won't believe what happened next. As I stood there, I could feel the officer's gaze fixed on me, scanning for any sign of hesitation. The situation felt surreal, but I stayed calm, knowing I had done nothing wrong. I politely asked, "Am I being detained, or am I free to go?" That simple question seemed to rattle them. Instead of answering directly, the officer repeated their demand for my ID, their tone growing firmer. It was clear they weren't used to someone pushing back, legally, of course. This wasn't my first time in a situation like this. Over the years, I've learned that understanding your rights is one of the most powerful tools you can have. The law is there to protect us, but only if we know how to stand by it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was different. Something about the officer's demeanor hinted at more than just routine procedure. Why were they so persistent? What was their endgame? The officer's persistence only deepened the mystery. They didn't answer my question about being detained, sidestepping it completely. Instead, they leaned in, their voice carrying a mix of authority and frustration as they said, "Refusing to show your ID just makes things harder for you." That line stuck with me. Harder how? What were they trying to imply? I knew my rights, but I could feel the pressure building. Every second stretched longer than the last. Around us, people were starting to notice. A few bystanders glanced over, their curiosity obvious. Was this encounter just routine for the officer, or was something more at play? I couldn't help but wonder if this was about asserting control rather than following the law. Meanwhile, I kept my tone respectful, answering their questions carefully but never giving more than I had to. It was a balancing act, staying firm without escalating the situation. But then the officer reached for their radio, and I knew things were about to take another turn. What exactly were they planning? The officer's hand hovered over their radio, and for the first time, I felt a knot form in my stomach. What were they calling in? Backup? A supervisor? My heart raced, but I kept my expression calm. Every word I had spoken was deliberate, careful, and rooted in the rights I knew I had. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing tension. A small crowd was beginning to form, their murmurs barely audible over the sound of my own thoughts. Then the officer took a step closer, their tone sharper now. "If you're not going to cooperate, we'll have to take this further." The words hung heavy in the air, but I held my ground. I calmly repeated, "Am I being detained?" This time, there was no immediate answer, just a long, tense pause. The officer's expression hardened, as if they were calculating their next move. My mind raced. What were they hoping to achieve? Did they expect me to back down? All I knew was that this moment was critical, and every second felt like it could change everything. Just when I thought I had the officer's next move figured out, another squad car pulled up. My chest tightened as two more officers stepped out, their presence immediately shifting the energy. The crowd grew quieter, their curiosity now mixed with unease. What was happening? Was this really about an ID refusal, or had something bigger been set in motion? The lead officer exchanged a brief, almost cryptic glance with the newcomers before turning back to me. "We're not going to ask again," they said, their voice firmer than before. The situation was escalating quickly, but I knew this was the moment to stay composed. I calmly asked, "What's the reasonable suspicion for stopping me?" Their hesitation was telling, but instead of answering, one of the new officers stepped forward. That's when it happened. They said something I wasn't expecting, something that made my pulse race and changed everything about this encounter. The officer who had stepped forward broke the silence with a tone that was calm yet commanding. "We've been looking for someone matching your description," they said. My heart sank for a moment, but I quickly reminded myself that I had done nothing wrong. "I'm happy to clear that up," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "But without reasonable suspicion, I'm not required to show my ID." Their eyes narrowed, and I could tell they weren't used to people standing their ground. Then, almost as if on cue, one of the officers received a call on their radio. They stepped away, listening intently before glancing back at me. "It's not them," they muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Relief started to wash over me, but the moment wasn't over yet. The lead officer, clearly frustrated, waved the others off and turned back to me with a final warning. "Know this, you're lucky today." As they walked away, I couldn't help but wonder what lucky really meant. Was this a routine encounter gone wrong, or something more calculated? One thing was clear: knowing my rights had made all the difference. But just as I started to leave, a bystander approached and said, "You're braver than most. I've seen them pull this before." That's when I realized this story wasn't just about me. It was about standing up so others could feel empowered to do the same. As I walked away, the weight of the encounter finally hit me. The officers were gone, but the tension lingered. I glanced back at the small group of bystanders, some nodding in silent support. That stranger's words stayed with me. This wasn't just my story. It was a reminder of how many people might not know their rights or feel confident enough to stand firm in moments like this. The experience left me with one clear takeaway: knowledge is power. I wasn't trying to be difficult or confrontational. I was simply standing up for myself within the boundaries of the law. If nothing else, I hope this story shows the importance of staying calm, respectful, and informed. As I drove away, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. Encounters like these aren't just about one person. They are about setting an example for anyone who might face the same situation.